Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and everyone else here in witness to the trial of the people versus Sweet Tooth, aka Needles Kane, aka Marcus Kane, depending on the version. This is a man who's committed a lot of heinous acts in his time, and in this, the current year, we're going to be trying him for all his crimes in accordance to American laws and regulation. Now, I am neither a lawyer nor an American, so those in the jury and all around the world are encouraged to add any additional charges that the court may have missed. Let the trial commence. However, before we start, I would like to call a short recess to talk about today's sponsor, CookUnity. CookUnity is the first chef-to-customer platform delivering freshly made pre-selected meals straight to your door every week. With a model built on maximum convenience, you can pick from hundreds of different meals, each attached to a different chef from around the country, or let them choose for you based on your taste preferences, such as Chris Rattel's rainbow grain salad with grilled salmon, or soy filet Schwader's hoisin grilled chicken thighs. I hope I said that name correctly. Personally, my favorite is Jose Garces's short rib mac and cheese. They're easy to prepare, with most being ready in 5 minutes of prep. Plans start for as little as $11 reduce a meal. They're flexible, so you can order as few as 4 meals or as many as 16 meals a week, and it's commitment free, so you can skip a delivery, pause your subscription, or cancel at any time, no questions asked. And if you're not convinced, you can follow the link in the description to cookunity.com/bacon50 or go to cookunity.com and use my code BACON50 at the checkout to get 50% off your first order. So what are you waiting for? Experience the quality and convenience of CookUnity today. I'm Buddy Peacock, and I approve this message. Thank you to CookUnity for sponsoring today's video. Now back to your regularly scheduled courtroom drama. First of all, the court wishes it to be known that no implicitly broken laws shall be counted here. We can make an estimate for how many crimes that the defendant has committed. However, if it did not happen directly on screen or in such a way that there's tactile proof that he committed a crime, we will not be including it. Alright, that's that. We start off, of course, at the beginning with the very first game in the series, Twisted Metal 1995. The first notable crime that Mr. Kane committed in this game would be Grand Theft Auto. Yes, according to the manual, this ice cream truck that we're driving is a stolen ice cream truck. Grand Theft Auto can carry a sentence of upwards of 5 years and a fine of $5,000. Now, since we're addressing all facets of the canon, something happens in the lost ending of Twisted Metal 1 that doesn't take place in the official ending. And that's kidnapping. Now, to be clear, I don't know who the f*** this is. I mean, I know who the actress is, but I don't know who the character herself is. I'm sure there would be some additional context had this made it into the final game. However, she was definitely kidnapped for one reason or another, and kidnapping carries a sentence of 20 years to life. And since we're really trying to nail this guy to the cross, let's just say life in this case. Alright, now let's move on to the fun stuff. First of all, there's the obvious reckless driving, which depending on whether or not someone is harmed can result in differing sentences, and people are definitely harmed during these sequences of reckless driving. And in that case, the sentence can be upwards of 10 years. I'd say each individual segment of gameplay counts as one count of reckless driving, and so that counts for 6. And given all the weapons that you use, there's also possession of explosives, which can carry a sentence of upwards of 10 years, and also some of these weapons classify as firearms, and illegal possession of firearms at a federal level can carry upwards of 10 years in prison, as well as a $250,000 fine. Then we have vehicular manslaughter, which is a tough one to specify as far as the number of offenses, considering that this entirely takes place within gameplay. What I mean to say is, there aren't any eyewitness accounts of a specific number, but there is a definitive testimony that vehicular manslaughter has taken place. So we can only say that there are several cases of vehicular manslaughter, which carries a sentence of upwards of 15 years. And then we have destruction of property. Now, if we're going with the idea that Sweet Tooth did in fact win the tournament, he had to destroy 12 other playable vehicles, each of which are valued quite high, and therefore each count as an individual case of destruction of property, which can carry a sentence of upwards of 10 years, as well as a fine 3 times the value of the property destroyed. It should also be mentioned that the whole of Los Angeles was also greatly damaged during this tournament, but it's unclear how much of that is specifically Sweet Tooth, and how much is based on the actions of the 12 other competitors. So we can't quite nail down any sort of sentencing in that case, but we have more than enough here to have the charges stick. Now, the instances of murder are where things get a little bit shaky, because while these tournaments are fought to the death, That's always been the shakiest part of the chronology, is that despite obviously dying, most of the characters find their way back to the games at least once. I feel like the explanation there is somewhat simple, though, if you really think about it. If we're acting upon the chronology where a single character, in this case Sweet Tooth, is winning every competition, that means the characters who don't come back are classified as murders, whereas the characters that do come back are classified as attempted murder until such a point where they stop coming back. In this case, Angela Fortin, Agent Stone, Commander Mason, Scott Campbell, Captain Spears, and Dave don't show up again after this, although it should be mentioned that Scott Campbell's already dead, so that doesn't count. There's not even a body, as he's a ghost, so you can't even count it as any sort of abuse of a corpse. Meaning this counts as 5 first-degree murders and 7 counts of attempted murder. First and second-degree murder carry a maximum of a life sentence, and attempted murder carries a maximum sentence of 15 years. You may say that because everyone signed a contract and agreed to be in the competition, that contractually precludes Needles from criminal responsibility when it comes to killing the other competitors. That's bullshit. Contract law only applies if the contract is legally enforceable. Just because somebody signed a contract saying that they agreed to the possibility of being murdered, that doesn't mean murder is illegal. That just means that Calypso himself is also liable to the potential of being charged for murder for having organized the event. In fact, I'll say this much, perhaps one day I'll do a video like this for Calypso. However, as far as attempted murder, it doesn't quite stop there, because in the lost endings to Twisted Metal 1, Sweet Tooth opens fire on Calypso, his goons, and his hoes. I count 7 people here, and the 2 himbo gunmen appear to die before the kidnapped woman puts a stop to Sweet Tooth's rampage, and it seems to be spontaneous, making it second-degree murder, which means he committed an additional 5 counts of attempted murder, bringing the total count up to 12 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 5 counts of first-degree murder. I guess it's up for debate as to whether or not the contestants count as first or second degree, because on one hand there isn't any personal connection with these characters and no real motivation beyond winning the contest. However, at the same time, he's knowingly signing up for a demolition derby fight to the death, knowing that the possibility of death is a very real thing. So to me, him going into it, knowing that he has the potential to kill people, makes this premeditated in my eyes. Twisted Metal 2, meanwhile, is comparatively more straightforward than the first game when it comes to the issue of crimes, because there's no secret endings to contend with, and our defendant doesn't even appear in the manual, as they made the baffling decision to make him a secret character. But either way, following the template of the previous game, we have 1 more count of possession of explosives, 1 count of illegal possession of firearms, and 8 counts of reckless driving. This game has a few cases of randomly spawning pedestrians, which means we get a few more cases of vehicular manslaughter. The amount we are unsure of, but we are assured that at least a few take place. Otherwise, if we go by the same logic as the first game and assume that everyone who never returned is a murder and everyone who did return as an attempted murder and all the vehicles as destruction of property, we have 7 counts of first-degree murder with Charlie Kane, Mike and Stu, Ken Masters, Amanda Watts, Simon Whittlebone, and Krista Sparks. Now, you may be confused about the last 2 because they do appear in the next game in this particular timeline, but they appear as ghosts. So they count as murder in this particular case. Otherwise, there are 8 characters who survived the future, so that's 8 counts of attempted murder, as well as 14 vehicles for destruction of property. It's also worth mentioning that nothing really bad or criminal happens during his ending, so this is all we have. So let's move on to Twisted Metal 3, which is probably the briefest of all the lists of crimes that the defendant has ever committed, given the fact that this series of events only has 1 cutscene concerning him, and it's about 20 seconds long. He also didn't break any laws in this cutscene. He went to the dentist for eating too much candy, not exactly Jesse James. I mean, if being stupid was a punishable crime, then Sweet Tooth would be put to death for this cutscene, but at least not until I take office. Stupidity is not a crime. So based on our usual calculations, we have 8 more counts of reckless driving, 1 more count of possession of explosives, 1 more count of illegal possession of firearms, then many characters don't make it to the next game, which is the end of this chronology. And most characters only appear as bosses after this, those being Axel, Augur, Minion, and Thumper. Also, Mr. Grimm makes it to the next game after a trip to the Caribbean, so Sweet Tooth is charged with 5 counts of attempted murder. Meanwhile, several characters never make it back, including Club Kid, Carl and Jamie Roberts, Firestarter, and Flower Power, so the total ends up being 11 counts of first-degree murder, and then between the vehicles, he's charged with 15 counts of destruction of property, plus 2 counts of trespassing, I'd say, because Hangar 18 has a very government-y, top-secret aesthetic, and also nobody goes to the North Pole except for Santa and his elves, so I would say you're not supposed to go there either, therefore trespassing. Trespassing usually carries a maximum sentence of 1 year in prison, so that's it for this particular series of events. Moving on. In Twisted Metal 4, Mr. Kane's charges do take a bit of a turn because in this case he's not a contestant, and as a matter of fact, he's embracing his inner carnival barker and has now hijacked the entire competition from Calypso. As a matter of fact, I think most of his charges stem from this one event. We start with breaking and entering, which carries a maximum sentence of upwards of 25 months in prison, and then we have trespassing, which we just went over. We have 1 count of attempted murder when he threw Calypso from the building, and then we have 1 count of theft when he stole the priceless ring that gave Calypso his powers, which, if it classifies as a felony, can carry upwards of 3 years in prison. Then he's also the canonical final boss, which means throughout the multiverse of possibilities, he fought every single eventual winner, accounting for 16 additional counts of attempted murder, for a total of 17. Maybe more if you count the bosses or the custom character. He also has one of the most grossly overpowered special weapons in the entire series, so if you ask me, that qualifies him for committing 1 count of manufacture or possession of a weapon of mass destruction, which is a life sentence. Then there's also probably some sort of criminal code violation with the theme park itself, but nothing I can discern. Besides, most amusement park-based litigation results in lawsuits rather than criminal trials, so we may be out of luck in that regard. Near as I can tell, that's all for this game, so screw it. Why don't we also charge him for the result of every ending? I mean, he is responsible for all of them. In Captain Grimm's ending, he's charged with 1 count of animal cruelty for killing the parrot. Animal cruelty carries a sentence of upwards of 7 years in certain states. As far as Pizza Boy is concerned, the car he's driving definitely qualifies for illegal vehicle modifications, but penalties for that vary from state to state. And the only info I can find says that the result is a traffic ticket, kind of beyond our jurisdiction. Furthermore, it was Pizza Boy's choice to illegally street race on his own, so those punishments would be his and not Sweet Tooth's to serve. The wish he granted for Microblast and Goggle Eyes ended with both of them dying, so that's 2 counts of first-degree murder because he had to actively make the choice to twist the wish like that. Same goes for the Joneses, who died horrifically when he drove them off the cliff. This seemed like a spontaneous decision, so I'm counting it as second-degree murder, and there were 4 people in the car. He also deliberately drove the RV off the cliff, which counts for me as 1 count of destruction of property. Then there's Orbital, whom there's obviously some sort of crime committed here when Sweet Tooth basically disfigured the entire human population in order to make Orbital normal again, but fucked if I know what that is. Most if not all bodily disfigurement charges also involve assault, whereas this didn't involve assault. Sweet Tooth just poofed half of everyone's faces away, which should be a crime, but doesn't seemingly have a particular definition without involving any sort of physical assault. That would require criminal precedents, and obviously you can't poof people's face away in real life, so I have to get back to you on that, but as of now, no charges can be laid for this. And yeah, that's basically it. Even when Quattro comes to arrest Sweet Tooth's motley crew, he doesn't specify anything other than crimes against humanity, which is a charge that's far too vague to be tangible. So even once you take every ending into account, Sweet Tooth is comparatively squeaky clean. But that's about to change for his next caper, Twisted Metal Black. I know it's been established in the past that this game, series of events, was a giant hallucination. Excuse me while I ignore that for the purposes of this video. Prosecution. So this one's gonna be a doozy. We got the usual staples: illegal explosives, illegal possession of firearms, vehicular manslaughter against pedestrians, 8 counts of reckless driving, all the usual fun of the fair. Plus, I'd say his special attack in this case once again counts as a weapon of mass destruction, so let's add 1 more to that count in that regard. However, there is one instance of a law broken that hasn't appeared anywhere else in this series thus far. And that is 1 count of abuse of a corpse. I've been made aware that this is actually an indictable offense in the States. I just wasn't typing the correct phrasing. From what I can gather, the maximum sentence will vary from state to state. However, the usual maximum sentence that I could find is 2 years. Now, there are more cases of interactable environments that could count towards destruction of property. However, once again, there's no hard number we can nail down, nor is there any way to verify the culprit being the defendant or any number of the several other contestants that he killed. As for murder, everyone in this particular version are unique characters with new backstories. However, every single one of them makes it to the pseudo-sequel, Twisted Metal Lost. So I think it would probably count for that game instead of this one, except for Preacher, who's dead in the next game, John Doe, who's a clone in Lost, and then there's Warhawk and his backup tankers, which I think you need at least 3 to take out his shields. So we'll say the canon amount is 6 first-degree murders. Although technically, according to his Lost bio, John Doe was killed by Calypso, but we're ignoring that. We're going with the assumption that this is the canon in which Sweet Tooth won. And John Doe was only killed by Calypso in the canon in which John Doe won, if you see what I mean. But that's about as far as his official premeditated murders go, and if you add up all the canon destruction of property, it makes up for 18 counts of destruction of property between the competitors, Warhawk, and the 3 tankers. Now on to second-degree murders. It's noted in the manual that he does have some people that he specifically hunts down, but more often than not, it's entirely random, and for every other kill in the game, we don't really know if they were premeditated or not, so we have no other choice but to assume they weren't. We have the unnamed male who's killed during Sweet Tooth's opening cutscene via soundbite.
Please, no, I got a family.
Shut up and bleed, you motherfucker.
We don't know if this was one of the people that were noted as being killed in one of the several newspapers, so we'll say he isn't, just to pad the numbers. Then we also know that the defendant admitted to killing Axel's wife, or son, in the non-canon beta cutscenes. Then Calypso is killed in the final cutscene when something happens to his head. One moment it was cut off, then the next it's still fully attached. I looked through the manual and found a newspaper clipping dated for October of 2000 stating another day another murder, so we can add that to the list of verifiable murders. Although this does raise an interesting point that it seems to be an almost daily thing, but until we have some sort of hard stat to that effect, we can only count the ones we know about. We would need to have more information such as what the first day was that a murder took place in order to track the exact amount, and we'd also have to verify that this newspaper headline wasn't an exaggeration. And finally, we have to talk about his middle cutscene. Holy crap, his middle cutscene. First of all, we have 4 victims in these pictures, and the ones that flash by too quickly to see seem to be the same pictures zoomed in on, so those don't count. Then he butchered an entire supermarket. An exact amount can't really be reached, but I did some research and found that the average supermarket has roughly 33 employees, and obviously a supermarket doesn't have all 33 employees working at the same time, but with that said, we can also make the assumption that if all 33 aren't working, that the average can also be applied to the amount of people in the supermarket at any given time, so between the customers and people working, we can assume 33 people were killed. Then we also have to take into account the newspaper reading that stated they found the 23rd murder victim. So we're just going to assume that all these people that were murdered by Sweet Tooth weren't already accounted for. He says that after Preacher cursed him, he killed 3 police officers.
It took me less than a minute to kill 3 police officers.
However, there were 4 police officers, so we can make the deduction that he killed 3 and almost killed the 4th. So as far as his murder charges go, that's it near as I can tell, leaving us with 68 counts of second-degree murder and a total of 13 counts of attempted murder. Plus him breaking out of his execution would result in 1 count of prison breach, 1 count of resisting arrest, and 4 counts of aggravated assault, assault and battery, as well as assaulting a police officer, all of which carry a maximum sentence of 10 years, except for assaulting a police officer, which is a potential life sentence. When the prosecution is dealing with a series of convictions this robust, it can be very tough to nail down every single thing. And of the list of people that were killed, divvying up the first degree and second degree sentences is a bit difficult. So this is the best that we can do. After all that harrowing bullshit, I think that's it. So let's move on to a slightly more upbeat series of events in the form of Small Brawl. And trust me, the hits don't stop coming just because this is a scaled down version of the series, and as a matter of fact, this version of Sweet Tooth is still quite the rapscallion. You may tell me that this is a different version of Sweet Tooth, and I will say, who cares? We're charging all versions of Sweet Tooth regardless of how authentic they are to the original version. Because Small Brawl surrounds the idea of an RC car tournament as opposed to the usual full-sized cars, nobody dies. But each RC car is still quite the expensive and intricate little piece of hardware, so I'd say that all counts for a little bit of destruction of property for a total count of 15. With that said, however, the rest of Sweet Tooth's crimes take place in his ending, which is surprisingly very similar to his secret ending in the very first game. During this incredibly short cutscene, Sweet Tooth commits 1 count of trespassing, 1 count of Grand Theft Auto, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of reckless driving, and finally 1 count of resisting arrest. Not a bad day at the office, even for somebody as young as him. Having these charges stick may be a bit of a gray area given the fact that in this game our boy Needles is 10 years old. Now, the age of criminal responsibility is a bit of a liquid concept, especially in the United States, where the age changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, the age of criminal responsibility is as low as 6, and in some jurisdictions, it's as high as 11 or 12. However, since we know he's 10 years old, that can put him over the edge in most states, and that's good enough for us. With that said, however, it's also demonstrated that he's entirely nonverbal, communicating exclusively in maniacal laughter. This might indicate a mental disability that could preclude him from criminal responsibility. However, it's no guarantee until we see medical records, but since the court does not have access to these medical records, it'll be up to the comment section, jury, to decide if these criminal charges should stick. Although by the end of this, that question may be superseded by a completely different, more pertinent question. And now we have Twisted Metal head-on. Once again, you know the drill. Firearms, explosives, 11 counts of reckless driving, 13 counts of destruction of property, insofar as you have 13 characters who are officially part of the tournament who aren't Sweet Tooth or extensions of Sweet Tooth, and X amount of vehicular manslaughter. I think that's it until we get to the big stuff, and so in the case of murders, this is technically the last game in this particular continuity, so it's safe to say that everyone is dead by the end of this, although I will say we basically have our first instance of what is undisputedly self-defense, that being the case of the ATV riders as well as Cousin Eddie in the mid-game boss fight. And why is that? Well, because it's established that they're not officially part of the contest, they're an interruption to the contest.
You were not invited and have in fact ruined my contest. You get no prize.
And therefore, in this particular string of continuity, Sweet Tooth is protecting himself from an outside force, although you can play as ATV and he is officially part of the contest, which is confusing as hell. If it were up to me, I would only have ATV individually count as a first-degree murder, as he was officially part of the contest, but if you want to add Eddie and his goons, that's 11 individual murders that may or may not be disqualified. I'll leave it up to the jury to decide. But as for the official contestants, you also have to take into consideration that 2 of the contestants are already dead. 3 if you count Mortimer, who's a reanimated corpse, but there's no body for the first 2, so you can't abuse a corpse that doesn't exist. So I think the only one that would technically count as abuse of a corpse would be Mortimer. But there's also the fact that in all instances before this, they were being coy about Marcus and Needles being the same person, but in this game it's a key element, so how do we count that? The same goes for Dark Tooth and Tower Tooth. Okay, I'm just gonna play it safe and say we have 11 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of abuse of a corpse, and when it comes to Calypso and Marcus Kane, I'd say that instead of any sort of murder charge, those would count as identity theft. I mean, Sweet Tooth straight up wishes to switch bodies with Calypso, and also Marcus Kane and Needles kinda switch back and forth. So, you know, if he has different personalities, that's sort of identity theft if you don't think about it. Identity theft can carry a maximum sentence of 5 years, and while Sweet Tooth doesn't murder Calypso himself, he does call for his goons to do it. I think the law is called solicitation of murder, although there are mixed reports on what it's called from what I could find. But either way, it's a life sentence if the murder is successful, which it is. Plus, I'm also pretty sure that the 2 women he's with in the ending are actually prostitutes, so let's just say they are because this is a completely and utterly biased courtroom. Solicitation of prostitution can carry a sentence of upwards of 3 years in prison. I think that's everything for Head On. Moving on to Twisted Metal Lost. This one doesn't really have much of a story, so there really isn't much to go on. However, you know the drill: firearms and explosives, 3 counts of reckless driving, but then we also have assault causing bodily harm, which carries a potential of 10 years in prison, as well as dismembering a human body, which can carry upwards of 30 years in prison. This all happens to Cage, who found himself a limbless torso after a run-in with Sweet Tooth. Furthermore, we have 3 more counts of abuse of a corpse specifically targeted towards the reanimated corpse of 12-Pack, aka Severed Sam, as well as Charlie, Kane, and Preacher. Then finally, I was considering putting all the murder charges for the characters from Twisted Metal Black in that game, but I'd be remiss not to put them here because this is technically where they ended up, and given once again the premeditated nature of the tournament setup and the fact that this is the end of the continuity of the Black universe, we have 12 cases of first-degree murder in this particular continuity once you eliminate everyone who's already dead. So that's about it for this Lost Adventure, but with that said, we have one more sequence of events to account for, and that's Twisted Metal 2012. Okay, so Twisted Metal 2012 is in no uncertain terms where the majority of Sweet Tooth's crimes take place. In fact, there's really just one cutscene where the absolute worst of it takes place, but we'll get to that. First, to cover the less serious crimes, you have vehicular manslaughter, because this is a game where you can specifically run people over after blowing up their cars, which even allows you to get some health back. There's no specified amount of vehicular homicide, so we can only determine that it did indeed take place. And then we have the usual illegal firearm possession and possession of explosives, 6 counts of reckless driving, and a partridge in a pear tree to get out of the way. Then we get to the fun stuff. Sophie Kane never officially died by the hands of needles, however, his many attempts does qualify as attempted murder, as well as aggravated assault. Then he has more than enough murder to fill out the docket, so without further ado, let's get to that. As far as gameplay is concerned, this time all the individual characters we fight outside of the boss fights aren't named, and there are only 3 actual characters in this game that are considered important enough to have names. Otherwise, they're all part of one of several different factions, and in that respect, one can presume that each individual car that our defendant destroyed counts as an individual murder. In the first 3 levels, you have to fight 6 separate opponents. In level 4, you have respawning opponents, but if you manage to kill Juggernaut quickly, you only have to fight 5 total. But that's made up for in the next level, where I counted 12 opponents. This level is a race, but it ends with you willingly activating a bomb attached to every combatant, which kills every single one of them. And after that, we have the Brothers Grimm boss fight, which only counts for 4 people, because there's 2 people in each truck. But wait a minute, there's 2 people in every car you destroy. That's part of the gimmick, with every character having a driver and a gunner. Oh, that makes things more interesting. So if you calculate that, that means in the story mode you have a total of 74 counts of verifiable first-degree murder. And since we've determined that number, we can also apply destruction of property to that charge, given the fact that the defendant also destroyed all the vehicles of each of these characters at the same time. So the total number of destruction of property will equate to 37. I'm also going to add Calypso's desk to that count for a total of 38. I mean, that desk does look like it was probably expensive. It was probably made of mahogany.
Mahogany.
Meanwhile, he murdered his entire family except for Sophie and Charlie. Based on this picture, we know he had 4 kids and also a wife. And 2 of his kids survived, meaning there's 3 counts of first-degree murder. We know this was premeditated because when he finally put on the mask, he chose them as a deliberate first target. So putting 2 and 2 together, we can determine that he committed 77 counts of first-degree murder. Normally I do second first and first second, but you'll see why I'm saving second-degree murder for last here. His first murder in the game takes place off screen, but we do see the body and the man himself walking off triumphantly, so context tells us he killed the woman. This one didn't appear to be premeditated, so we can assume it's a second-degree murder, and as a matter of fact, for every murder that we see him commit, there's only a small handful that we can definitively classify as premeditated. Then the hospital scene is where things get a little bit choppy, much like the man himself, because we know based on context and the defendant's own admission that he went through systematically floor by floor, slaughtering everyone. So it's reasonable to assume that aside from his daughter Sophie, whom he was looking for, everyone is dead. An exact number is hard to come by, but it's said that hospitals have an average of 982 employees. Now it's reasonable, like before, to assume that not every single employee was working at the time, but imagine being someone like that. Imagine being the person who switched shifts with somebody else only to find out the entire place was massacred. Either way, even if not every single employee was present, you could imagine that patients and visitors probably made the difference, so I'm going to use the 982 figure as the estimated number of second-degree murders, for a total of 983 counts of second-degree murder. Lord knows the kind of crimes he committed when the cameras were off him. But these are the numbers that we can determine based off what we see. And you know what, I probably still missed something. Now, I'm cutting it off there. I would include the TV show as part of this discussion, however, I wouldn't want to do so until the TV show is definitively over, and we're at least a couple of years away from that, so we'll just say as far as the games are concerned, his charges consist of 1 count of dismembering a human body, 1 count of solicitation of murder, 2 counts of solicitation of prostitution, 2 counts of resisting arrest, 1 count of prison breach, 1 count of breaking and entering, 1 count of animal cruelty, 1 count of theft, 5 counts of abuse of a corpse, 2 counts of identity theft, an unverified amount of vehicular manslaughter, 51 counts of reckless driving, 4 counts of trespassing, 2 counts of grand theft auto, 2 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of manufacture or possession of a weapon of mass destruction, 7 counts of possession of explosives, 7 counts of illegal possession of firearms, 1 count of assault causing bodily harm, 4 counts of assaulting a police officer, 4 counts of assault and battery, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 126 counts of destruction of property, 56 counts of attempted murder, 1,057 counts of second-degree murder, and 130 counts of first-degree murder. I think that's it. So taken all together, Sweet Tooth, aka Needles, aka Marcus, is facing a maximum charge of 1,197 concurrent lifetime sentences and an additional 2,962 years and 1 month at least, as well as a potential fine of at least $1,760,000, assuming my math is correct. Yeah. And everything here is a conservative estimate given that there are many crimes that we couldn't get an exact number on. With that said, however, the court wishes it to be known that the entire series of crimes does come with one major caveat that I alluded to earlier. Needles, Marcus, Sweet Tooth, Kane could potentially be let off on all charges on the grounds of insanity. He's clearly not in his right mind and has spent time in psychiatric facilities in the past. However, he's definitely too dangerous not to be locked up indefinitely, if not given capital punishment if possible. The court has no official ruling on this matter, however, we will leave it up to the jury to decide whether or not an insanity plea is valid with this many horrible atrocities committed by a single man. So that will be the comment section's job for the week, and we can determine whether or not we can smoke this motherfucker. Otherwise than that, the court wishes it to be known that if you wish to support us, you can like this video, leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what the courtroom is up to. And if you wish to support the courtroom in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to the Patreon for unique perks such as early access, Discord benefits, exclusive content, and more, along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thank you to Brooklyn, Dick Kickham, Gaw004, FarmCat84, Raph, Ranger X, Ty Trovy, Weird Webster, and Monsieur Thenardier for going above and beyond. Elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.